The media has been talking a lot about the differences in the economic development within our Aboriginal communities and the economic development that's occurring off reserve. I just wanted to reiterate that we have roughly over 600 bands in Canada. We've got numerous Metis communities in Canada, and we've got probably about 200 Inuit communities. So roughly we've got about 1,000 First Nations, Métis and Inuit communities in Canada. And if you're looking at the stats, it's about 1.5 million people. 50% of them live off reserve in our urban communities or urban environments. And when you start talking about economic development at a community level, you got to understand, and I know that the general direction that most of the media attention was with respect to how do you get the bands to sign on to industry agreements and all the other issues that are associated with trying to get industrial development occurring out on the reserves, mining and gas development and everything else like that. And if you're aware of anything on the political scheme, on the political realm within Canada, you know that all of our bands have been severely impacted with respect to reductions in budgets and reductions in resourcing that comes out to them. We also know that that all of our tribal councils have been impacted, roughly about 50%, maybe in some instances 60 to 70% of their budgets have been reduced. On a national front, of course, all of our national organizations have had their budgets reduced by about 50%, in some places 70%. So there's been a lot of political maneuvering that's occurring where it's getting harder and harder and harder to find resourcing at a community level. And so what happens then is that a lot of our communities aren't really impacted by a lot of industrial development. So when you're talking about developing on at a community level, what you have to understand is that there has to be a lot greater focus on economic development than just industry development or any of the natural resource development that is occurring out there. That has to happen. Don't get me wrong, we have to focus on that, but the vast majority of our reserves are not impacted by that industrial development. Roughly I'd say about 75% of the reserves aren't impacted by industrial development. So that means that from the chief and council's perspective, we have to start looking outside the box and understanding how do we start to maneuver more of a sustainable economic environment for the community to become successful with. So there's a lot of opportunity that's out there. It's just that you got to start thinking outside the box, outside the realms of saying that some industry agreement's going to save our lives, or some mining agreement or natural gas agreement that's going to save our lives. And yeah, and a lot of the communities that are impacted by that will benefit. They will benefit. But it's the 75% of the communities that aren't impacted that we also have to start looking at how do we make them think outside the box and really start looking at how to encourage sustainable development on multiple different sectors, and looking beyond the reserve territory, so that they're looking at maybe getting involved in some economic development somewhere else, because as we're all aware, the resourcing that's coming from the federal and provincial levels is getting scarcer and scarcer and scarcer, and they're harder and harder to obtain. So that means that we have to really look at how do we move and maneuver around that whole process and make things more beneficial for our community environment. So there's a lot of different strategies we can develop, and then there's a lot of different models that we can start to employ for securing resourcing off of reserves. There's lots of joint venture opportunities, there's lots of partnership venture opportunities, and there's a lot more development than just focusing on the resource sector. So there's a lot more that can happen, and we just got to start looking at how do the chiefs and councils really start to take that into consideration when they're doing stuff. So it's all about giving a hand up, not a handout. And thank you.